Hey, I want to move to that next question about who should I talk next to? Is there a person that you want me to talk next to?
Yeah, there's a very nice person on my team called is called Rob Sollars, and
Hmm.
he's working with ThoughtWorks and he's mostly in the learning and development department in Amsterdam today.
I was
And
looking for a picture from him, but unfortunately his LinkedIn only gives this dog, if I'm correctly. So I haven't found a picture of him. But yeah, we don't always need to have these pictures to talk about it. So tell me a little bit about him. Why do you want me to talk with him?
because he has a great potential, I think he could develop in thousand different ways. But I think that having exposure and contact with an experienced agilist with you and having him answer your questions could really help him take out all the things that are potential in him.
Hi, today's interview is with Rob Sollars. We talked about the challenges and the strengths of being neurodiverse, about effective ways to make people experience what it is to work in agile, and how there are always more to do.
I'm Ivanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it.
Hello, everyone. Hello. And with me, I have Rob Sollars, I think I need to pronounce it. Is this correct?
That's exactly right, yes.
So, and while we're jumping right into that, I'm going to show a little bit on where we are. And I just clicked, like I predicted, on something wrong. So let me, this is interesting. Yeah, okay, now I can click. So this is my house that people see. And we're going back to where Rob is at this moment, or more or less. And that is not that far away because Rob is in Amsterdam. And so that's that is not that far away. And let me bring you back here. Where is it? Interesting. What did I do? This is this is interesting. I told you about a new setup and it's already giving me problems. Yes, here you're back. And I said, so from Ghent to Amsterdam, that's not that far away. And it also means that on my side, it's 9 o'clock. And I think on your side, it's also almost 9 o'clock.
Also 9 o'clock, yeah.
So we're doing this on a Sunday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning. So Rob, I jumped a little bit into it, had some technical issues, but before we go into the full interview, let's talk a little bit about who are you? What do you want people to know about you?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Eve. It's wonderful to get the opportunity to speak with you this morning. Hi, everybody. I'm Rob Sollars. I'm a consultant working at ThoughtWorks right now. Before I started at ThoughtWorks, I graduated with a degree in computer science, so I have quite a traditional way of getting into technology. After I graduated, I was a freelance software developer in London for 9 years. And then after that, I moved to Berlin to begin working with ThoughtWorks there. I worked in ThoughtWorks as a developer. I worked as a tech lead. My career has shifted recently, I would say. So I transitioned from being a tech lead into being a trainer. And my last engagement that I was at with ThoughtWorks, I got the opportunity to work with Matteo Vaccari, who was the person who recommended me for this interview. And
Exactly.
I have moved to Amsterdam just in February. So I haven't been here for so long. I don't know if you can see, but I'm still unpacking a lot of things. And this is a new city for me, and it's a very exciting place to be.
Yeah, you say, well, because it will be aired probably later, it might be interesting. So you're saying in February, we're just the 2nd of April, so really not that long, so a little bit over a month or so I would say that you're there. So okay, It's I've seen worse situations where I was moving and it took me a couple of months because like you are like you say, you are busy working, so I know how that feels. Sometimes it's like, okay, but that work goes ahead and then you need to, I need to actually plan time to unpack and move things, and but
Precisely.
life
And
goes on.
this angle this morning is very carefully chosen to disguise the boxes and unassembled furniture.
Well, there is a reason why this camera is very close as well, because I've actually been living in this new house for a while, but over COVID I've collaborated. I added lots of stuff, and so with the technical problems I had this week, I've been shifting cameras and everything, so everything is still behind me. So I understand that chosen angle. It's sometimes it's how we do when we work remotely, and this is what I said. For me, it's also about, okay, we can be transparent. Maybe we don't want to show all the chisel, but at the same time, we can be transparent. Like, okay, this is what life is all about. I think that's also important. And before we jump into the questions, when you say you moved into that new role from trainer, what kind of trainer is that? Is that then still technical training, or is that, how should I see it?
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate recently. I was given the opportunity to join ThoughtWorks University, which is a program that we have for graduates who join us, and it's an intense program where we get them ready to start being consultants. And I think that I had suspected for a long time that I would really enjoy doing that thing, and then I got to do it, and I adored it. And then I thought, I don't really want to go back into the world of development after this. So it's been technical training, and I've just started a new role as well, which is capability development. So it's maybe one level up from doing the trainings, and is trying to identify what trainings we need and how to get people the skills that they need to be doing the job that we're asking of them.
So do I understand correctly, when there's people who left school who want to join into IT, that are hired at ThoughtWorks, that you say, okay, we give a 1 week or a 6 months, I don't know how much time it is, but we give some kind of training that is really different from school. It's really much more practical. We learn some. And do you work on real programs, or is this just purely training on how does that work?
Yeah, so when I joined, it was a 7-week program. It's 3 weeks now. And I think that it's a really beautiful way to get people introduced into the kinds of ways that we do things, because I think that so much of it is practice, right? And so how do you get people the opportunity to do that practice? And the way that we go about that is that we create this safe environment where it is a simulation of a project. We get people to come and play the product owner role, but it has all of the rhythms and the feel of being on a delivery project. And I would say that it is the most effective way that I've seen to give people some idea about what it feels like to work in an agile team.
I really like that. I've seen multiple teams, multiple companies play around with something similar. Well, I hadn't been at ThoughtWorks, so I don't know how you actually do it. But I've seen multiple companies play with it. I've helped multiple teams set up or multiple trainings, and for me, it's the same thing. The best way to learn agile is by actually doing it. But how do you do it? And so if you can create an environment, especially in a company like ThoughtWorks, where you have so many people that have that experience, that have been doing it for almost 20 years, I would say, as a whole company, then I think, yeah, there is a lot of knowledge that you can spread by working with people. That's how it feels.
And this, I think, is something that we've been discussing quite a lot recently, is how to, what is the most effective way of supporting people on their learning journey. And I think that a really large part of it for me is, like, if I think about my journey into a lot of these topics, I particularly remember trying to get started with Git and how difficult I found that. The most effective thing was making mistakes, right? Like I made so many mistakes, and those things really hurt me. And I don't want to be in that situation again. You know, there is such a resistance to me about not having version control or not having tests before I make a change. I think as well, then if you graduate, then a lot of these topics are very new to people. And so giving people the opportunity to feel that pain I think it's very difficult. First of all, we need to make it clear that it's okay to make mistakes, to fail, and to celebrate those things. And I think as well, very often, we talk about these things in maybe a more academic sense, and it's not the practice, it's the ideas. But unless we're having people actually go and do those things and get it wrong, I don't think that that's an effective way to help people to grow.
Yeah, I just had a talk that I did for Agile India about mindset versus habits, and it came after, I think, 5 years of thinking. Yes, we talk a lot about mindset is important, but if I then talk to real agilists about how did you learn your mindset, almost everyone says the same thing. I learned it by doing. I learned it by my habits, by making mistakes, by trying out stuff. So yes, the mindset is important, but how do we teach it? We teach it by having people doing stuff. And like you say, Git or some kind of source control, because probably in 10 years it will be something else. But well, the good news is, when you were saying, my son is at university these days and he's using GitHub. So I don't know how much they learn, but at least they learn that code should be in a Git repository. Okay, when I see him working, he doesn't commit as often as I would like him to do, because they're still like, okay, I'm working on something, and I, depending on what teacher it is, it might help or not help, depending on how they do. But for example, one of the tools that they're using at the university in Ghent is, I can't come up with the name right now. I know this person will shoot me because I'm really a fan of the tool. But what the tool allows them to do is, when you learn a program, so they get some exercises, you have to make your exercises in the tool, and then you get feedback. So basically they run some kind of unit test behind it, and you get to hear, okay, these 5 tests are failing, and so you're not so this is not good, and then you can recommit your code. So, and they can actually do this also in the exam. So the exams can use these tools. So in the exam, students are learned that, okay, you write your code, you make a mistake, you get feedback immediately. This is working, this is not working, and you can, and so of course they have projects as well. So there's a two kind of thing. But learning a language that way, for me, it's like, wow, it's wonderful, and it's a tool that the University of Ghent has kind of opened up for all kind of other universities and schools. So it's used in Belgium in I think around 200 schools. So also lower schools, so not universities. So yeah, so they for children 12 to 18, they also learn some basic programming like Python or whatever with these kind of tools. So, and teachers can just add their own courses to this. So I really like what's happening there, because it's a little bit what you say. We want people to practice, and we want people to fail and feel how things are working.
That sounds really amazing. And I think as well, that traditional mode of testing, right? It's asking you to come up with the correct answer to begin with, but it's not how we work. Like it's the process that's important. It is making mistakes. It is getting that fast feedback. It's reflecting on that, thinking about what I could do better in the future. And so that sounds really promising, right? Like it's something that's saying, maybe you didn't get it right this time, but like these are the areas to consider. And it's so much more about the process than the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's you look, and it's I've used it myself too, because I like the tool and said, okay, I haven't been actually programming a lot, but last year I learned it, and this is why I use the example Python, because the Python course is an open course that you don't need to be at university, so you can just try it out. And I really liked it, because it was I learned parts of it, because of course this is a language I totally didn't know. And it really helped me to say, okay, if I do this, then I have this. And I don't know the specifics anymore, but it was teaching, of course, the typical thing, how's an if working, how's a loop working, things like that. And very quickly I learned, okay, probably I made an off by one mistake, because these tests tell me this is working, that's not working. So that was really interesting to try. Anyway, we jumped right into that. Let's start with that first question. Rob, what is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you?
Yeah, hey, thank you for the question, Yves. I think that something that has changed for me is that I have ADHD, and I was diagnosed with this when I was 33, so quite late in my life. And when I got that diagnosis, it felt like such an amazing gift. And then I was telling everybody, hey, I've got ADHD, and I was trying to explain what this thing was. I think something that I've come to appreciate is that is such a loaded term that it's really unhelpful. If I say this thing to you, you will interpret it through so many layers, and what I'm trying to express to you will be so different from the thing that you've arrived at that I don't really like to say that so much anymore. And so what I've been trying to focus on instead is talking about some of maybe the challenges that I have, and also maybe the strengths that it gives me. So rather than saying, hey folks, I have ADHD, I'm struggling to focus right now, I've been instead saying what I need support with are things like, if I'm doing detailed work, it's really helpful to have somebody to be able to check that for me. If I'm dealing with dates and times, then those don't really make sense to me in the way that they make sense to a lot of the other people who I work with. So I also need support with that. And I found this to be really effective because it is phrasing it in terms of things which are tangible. But also I found that when we are vulnerable and ask for support, then we tend to get that support. And I have been so overwhelmed by how understanding people have been with these things. So I think if you'd met me maybe 2 years ago, then I would have immediately said, hey, I'm Rob, I have ADHD, but maybe it's different now, because if you've been working with me, I would have said, hey, I can't really understand what Tuesday means. Can you help me with this?
So basically you're creating some kind of acceptance criteria for how or what you need to work with you, or what you need to finish something. Like if I want to work with dates, I need some kind of, I don't know, the explanation or whatever. That's kind of, it sounds like acceptance criteria for me, like these things and things that are really useful to work with IT, but maybe also for working with people.
Acceptance criteria is an interesting way of seeing it. Saying that I need certain things. I think that what's been really effective for me is being very intentional about how we're working together, right? So I think very often we end up working with somebody maybe that we haven't worked with before, and we have all of these expectations or like these implicit ideas about what that should look like. What I find really helpful is to take the time at the beginning just to kind of describe myself, like what can you expect working with me? What would I like to see? These are the things that are going to give me a lot of pleasure if I can have these things whilst working with you. And I found that has been really effective for me. And I think as well, I'm very fortunate because especially in ThoughtWorks, we don't very often do so much on our own. Usually it's either that we're pairing or we're doing something with a broader team. So it's unusual that I am isolated. So I do have these kinds of gaps in the areas where I can be really effective. Those gaps are filled by the other people that I'm working with. And so it's never too much of a problem for me.
Interesting. I'm really interested in the topic because yesterday I was sitting together with two people who were working on a personal agility course for neurodivergence and for their managers and leaders, because we see that I'm not going to go into the full history because then it would take me 6 months to explain. But both of these people see this. I've seen this a lot in other companies, and just like you, they have some things where they say, okay, this is what's working for me. This is what I've seen, and they have been talking a lot about that in the community. But I have a personal agility course that I have already for 10 years. And I've noticed that, wait a minute, I don't want to do it blurted out for everyone, but this is really what we see. A little bit like what you say, it's like, the people around me, if they know better how I am, you can make better use of me. And it's using that strength that you have, because like you say, if you just blurt out ADHD, people might 10 years ago, like, okay, this is some person to avoid to work with and whatever, because of negative things where people didn't see the positive side. I have a son who's dyslexic, and I know a lot these days about what are the advantages, what that means for creativity, what that means at multiple other things, and that is what we need to focus on. And of course, we can help a little bit, but finding tools how to avoid these kind of practical problems. But we should also focus on telling people, hey, that is, yes, there is a negative part that we need to fill in the gaps, like you so nicely said. But it also brings a lot of other things. It means that, yeah, some other things. And if we can help people around it, the team, the managers, the leaders, whoever, that people realize, okay, if it's a person, I know a person that really is distracted a lot by noise. Okay, so this is acceptable that this person in the work floor works with headphones most of the time, and you need to find different ways to say, hey, I need your attention now. And if we can combine these kind of things, we can go for a much more inclusive world. It sounds like what you do at ThoughtWorks, there is a lot of attention to these kind of things. So that's really
yeah. I also feel like I've been very fortunate. I think that we do try our best to celebrate diversity, and I think that this is one aspect of diversity. That course sounds really amazing, Eva. I would be really interested to see what you have in there. I think one of the things for me was that when I got that diagnosis, it is kind of socially constructed, right? Like our ideas around these things. And I think that I certainly grew up during a time where I don't think that it was very well understood what this thing was.
It was a time when people were given drugs in classes just to make sure that they sit still and that they pay attention. That's
right,
how
precisely.
it feels to me.
Yeah. Without, and I really like what you say, without any of this maybe celebration of the things that it does give, because it really has given me a different perspective. And I think that was, well, when I got that diagnosis, the thing that I felt was shame. It was very difficult for me to say for the first time, like I have this thing, because I had all of this baggage around what that meant. And as somebody who is personally affected by it, then I have gone on this journey trying to understand it a little better, But I think if one doesn't have that, then there's little motivation to kind of dig in and understand it a little better. And so I think that one of the things that we can do, which is really powerful, is that we just keep talking about it. When we talk about it, we normalize it, and then hopefully the next person who is in that situation doesn't have to feel that shame. It becomes easy to start to talk about it. And I think the other thing that we can do is just shift people's perception. So if we can give these really wonderful examples of how people are able to leverage the strengths of it, I think that makes it easier for everybody else. And I also really like what you say about making these affordances, because the things that I need are actually really small affordances. Like it's not very much. What you're saying about loud noises in the office, for instance, that affects me a lot. Like I'm very sensitive to noise, but I think that it's only a quantitative difference from anybody else. I think honestly everybody's affected by noise. And something that I've really struggled with, is like office spaces where there's a foosball table and then that's making a ton of noise. It's affecting me the most, but I also suspect that it's affecting everybody, just maybe not to the extent that it is me.
Yes, I think some people we might be able to filter it out, but then at the end of the day we go home and we don't realize why we have a headache. And the headache is maybe because there's been some background noise all the time that we kind of try to filter out, and we were able to focus, but that focus takes a lot of our energy. And what I see a lot of people, and well, I'll just not talk about others, I'll just look for myself, is the better I learned about, okay, what does my body tell me? What's happening here? Why do I feel like this? And then I start to realize, oh, wait a minute, I was in a noisy environment, or I was in, I don't know, for example, one of the things I notice is when I don't move enough, I feel really tired. And I that really surprised me, because usually people think, oh, you're tired because you've run too much of you. And I'm like, no, I've noticed that if I do, I'm working usually on, if I'm working at home, I'm working on a walking desk. So I'm really doing a lot of steps. If I don't do 10,000 or 12,000 steps a day, I really feel much more tired than even if I would do 40,000 steps on a day. I will feel it. My legs will be a little bit different if I do 40,000, but as a whole, my body will feel much more tired, which doesn't make any sense in one way, because it feels like, hey, you move, but yeah, this is part of what I need. I need my blood to move. I need these kind of things. And the more I think about it, the more I realize, okay, and I can imagine that you, because you're so much sensitive to some things, you might actually say things that, hey, this is bothering me, that, like you say, is actually bothering everybody, but we kind of all ignore it, and we kind of all become professional and try to ignore it. And then we have someone like you in our middle that says, well, for me it's too much. And then everybody else the next day said, hey, this was a quiet day at work, and now it's actually much better. And we don't realize it. I've been, I don't know if you've been in such situations where you made a remark and there was some change, and then other people around you said, this was actually also better for me. Did that happen already to you?
I don't know if that's an experience that I've had so far. I think that something that has really changed for me is maybe just having the confidence to be honest about the things that I'm feeling. I really loved what you just said. I think that so often as well, we imagine maybe that these technical pursuits as being this purely intellectual thing, and that we don't always have an appreciation of the holistic organism that is involved in that, and how important it is that we're taking care of the whole thing. And I absolutely have had that same experience, like we will be exhausted and we'll be thinking, wow, but I just sat around all day. But no, like sitting around all day is the most exhausting thing that we can be doing, right? And we really have to be taking care of the whole thing if we want to be effective at what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's, and there is still a lot to discover and a lot to learn. But yeah, we as a whole, and yes, my body is different, and the way how I feel things are different than what you feel. But by talking to each other, we might recognize, or I might understand my body a lot better, because I know that definitely I was not taking care of it. I was ignoring my body in multiple ways when I was younger, and only now I start to realize, okay, and of course it's getting, I'm past 50, so I feel a lot more pain, so that's part of it as well. But there's definitely things that I realize better, that, oh, for whatever reason, it didn't feel well for me to feel it, and I kind of ignored it in ways, because it there was some kind of survival mode that I still don't understand why that happened, or whatever that happened. And I think all of us, we have that. And I think people like you who are more neurodiverse might realize some of this much better. And I think that helps us once we get a focus on it.
Yeah, hey, I think that's super interesting as well, Eve. And as well, I think that's something that I have experienced is when we start to say these things, like I just need these small affordances, like I need a quiet space, or I need something that, like it isn't too bright, that's going to be effective for me. When we start to have these conversations, I feel like it also gives permission for other people to start to say the things that they need. And as well, I think that we're going to get into this, but the idea that we are human, and that we do have these needs, and that is valid, and that's a legitimate thing. I think if we can just keep having these conversations, then it's going to improve our lives dramatically. Yeah.
I think so too. So thanks for sharing that part, because it's indeed, it brings a whole kind of different things of thinking about it. So just like you said, you at some point you might be shared it too quickly. Now you scale back a little bit, but you find better ways of, I would say better ways, in the sense that, not that it's bad to say I just have ADHD and nothing more, but now you already help people to say, what does that mean? I need this, I need that, and that helps that conversation. And then later they might ask, okay, but why is that? And then you can go into that, and then they might understand. So that's it's also guiding that conversation. There is, I don't know if you know it, I've discovered some months ago, there is a tool that's called Manual of Me. So it's something on the internet where people, I'm not sure how the tool, so the idea of this is that you write out how people should interact with you, what you need, a little bit like you described, that there is a website where you can just say, okay, Manual of Me / and then your name, and people can find out more. It has all kind of questions, which is interesting, but I've done something similar in the past with an email, and I don't find the format yet on how to use it. But it's interesting, just as an idea to tell to people, hey, if you work with me, there are some practicalities. And what I like about this tool or this website is that it kind of normalizes the fact that everyone has also a kind of manual. And we prefer that the manual is the exact same manual of how to work with a human being, but that just is not the same for everyone. I have actually a manual of my house that when we moved in, because there's lots of technology in, I realized at some point, like, oh, wait a minute, the moment I'm dead or I'm not available, I'm in another country, to say a more positive thing, nobody else knows how to fix something in the house. So I started writing out every time I fix something in the house, I started writing it down. This is how I fix it, which is even for me handy. 5 years later, I'm like, oh, what that problem? What was it again? Okay, let's go back to the manual. Okay, it's there. I can fix it, and that helps my children to fix on stuff. It learned my daughter about DHAP and stuff like that. So on a more technical side, and I think we need that for multiple things. We usually don't read manuals, but I start to say, okay, there is handy things that we can collect on how to work with me, with our house, and other things. So
Wow, yeah, I've had the privilege to get to work with my colleague Birgitte Berkele in Berlin, and one of the things that she introduced me to was this idea as well of like writing a personal README and then sharing that when we start working with other people. And I think that it's just so effective. Again, I think that it's this thing where if we can do it, then it kind of gives permission for other people to do it. And then when we normalize these things, then you're absolutely right. Like we are similar in so many ways, and then we are distinct in so many ways also. If we can just get into a habit of just acknowledging that, I think it's about vulnerability as well, right? Like I think for me to be able to state these things, I have to feel that I can trust you to hear them in the way that they're intended. And I think that if we are able to put ourselves out there and say, hey, yeah, like I do need these things, then that is a moment of vulnerability. I think vulnerability creates vulnerability, and I think that can be really effective. I was really interested as well to hear about your saying that when you fix something in the house, then you write a little description of what's going on. And I wonder as well if there's some parallel between that and creating code, because it's a little bit like writing architecture decision record. But I wonder as well if there's an opportunity. I'm reminded of Joe Armstrong's thesis on Erlang, where he talks about the diagnosing and fixing of a bug that he finds. And I thought that was such a wonderful little story. I think that thesis generally is full of these adorable stories. And I really, like went on this journey about like figuring out what's wrong with this telephone exchange and what the process would be of fixing it. And so I wonder as well if there's this opportunity here for us to in some way like tell the stories of what it is like to be working on code, because I think so often these are like technical descriptions that we're writing, right? Like it's how this thing performs, but what is missing from that is maybe the human element of like, I got into work on Monday and there was this disk that was not working, and so like I went on this journey and I found these things out. And I think if we can narrativize some of the things that we're doing, then that makes it much more compelling for us to be able to access the ideas that are there.
Yeah, what you just described made me think. I don't know the exact name, but on GitHub there is a repository for big problems that were out on the internet when Twitter was down, or when, I don't know, whatever. And they're really like some kind of logs of really big issues. And I don't know if they're all big, but it's really interesting to just describe and then see. And typically it's something that we heard on the news or we had experienced ourselves, and then 2 or 3 days later there is some kind of log about, okay, this is what happened. Sometimes it's from internal people, sometimes it's from the external, what people think what happened. And it's really interesting to learn, like, because like you say, we're all humans, and some of these problems, well, most of these problems were caused by humans that didn't think about it, but that usually is because the system allows these people to make a mistake. And for example, the problem, and the reason why I bring it up is that just this week there was some kind of problem with charging my car, and I knew how to solve it. I just had to actually not unplug the car, but actually unplug the car, but also unplug the charger. So basically take out the how's it called, the fuse. So take out the fuse for the charger and then put it back on, and then it works again. So okay, it's kind of rebooting that charger one way or another. Maybe there's another way, but that's how I discovered that works. But unfortunately, when I was trying to do that last week, I didn't pay really much attention, and I turned off the wrong fuse, which was actually the main fuse for the house. So the whole house went down. And okay, I put it back up immediately. Unfortunately, my daughter was on a Zoom call, so that gave already some problems. But what was interesting afterwards is that, and I didn't see it that same day, we still have some printer lying around, a network printer that we don't use that much, and this is why I didn't discover it. But a few days later, my daughter was complaining, I can't find the printer anymore. And what I've discovered is that there is a router in our house that was set to eco mode, and when it's set to eco mode, he doesn't find the printer, and so nobody can find the printer anymore. And I know this because I once played around with it. So a router that has an eco mode, that's probably using a lot less electricity. Let's turn it on. And after that printer stopped working. So luckily, I noted that down in that document for our house. And so this week, when I couldn't fix it, I looked in the document, is there anything about the printer? And I found it. So probably what happened is that I did fix it the earlier time, but I didn't save it correctly, so that when the router reboots, he's still going back to eco mode. And so that happened, and I saw it. Oh, eco mode is on, turn it off. Oh, the printer is the printer automatically starts to print some pages. Well, like, okay. Yeah, last time I remembered that eco mode because I'd just been playing around with it. And so the day after I found it, if I had not noted that down in that document, I don't know how much time it would take me to discover. Now it even took me an hour to discover because, yeah, printer's not there. And okay, we don't use that printer that often. So yeah, it's possible that there is something else. So I've been looking at multiple ways, and I can ping to it. So it's there. I see it on the network, but then there's some other problem. No, it was on the internet, and I couldn't ping to it. So things like that. So again, manuals like that help out. But we jumped right into a lot of these in multiple kind of directions. I didn't see that coming, or I do because I've done lots of these conversations. So let's move to that second question, Rob. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea? Was there something that you were destined to become when you were younger, or at some other parts in your life?
So having seen some of your previous interviews, I think that there are two ways to interpret this question. And I think one of them is, if I wasn't in technology right now, like what, in an ideal world, what would I love to be doing? And I think the other one is, if things had gone differently and I didn't discover technology, then what would it look like for me? And I think reflecting on it, technology for me was something which really gave me something. So when I was young, I grew up in a very rural part of England, and there wasn't a ton of stuff there for me to engage with. And I at the time also had ADHD. So what that means for me is that I have this heightened need for...
You had it, but you were not diagnosed, so you didn't know. That's
exactly, yeah. So I had this sense that there was something which was different about me, but I couldn't articulate what that thing was. So I have this heightened need for stimulus, and it was difficult, I think, for me to find something which had the complexity that I could sink my focus into. I think ADHD is such a confusing one because it's all about one's focus, but the difficulty is bringing one's focus to different things. So it isn't that I lack focus; it's that I don't get to choose where that focus gets spent. And so the one side of that coin is that I'm very distracted. But the other side of it is this hyper-focus. So just being able to completely lose oneself to get into this state of flow. And that also has its own problems and complications because it becomes the only thing that one can think about. It's actually quite an unpleasant feeling for me. My heart starts racing and then I can't sleep and I'm just constantly thinking about these problems over and over. When I was younger, then I learned programming. I would be able to go on a web page. I was very fortunate because we had access to the internet when I was growing up, and I could click on view source and I could go and look at the JavaScript and I could kind of reverse engineer how these web pages were working. And I was also fortunate, right? Because it was the early days of the web, and we weren't necessarily compressing the JavaScript. Like, you could just go and read what was going on. And that was such a wonderful learning experience for me. But it also, with technology, there's always stuff that you aren't going to know, right? There's always more details and more levels of complexity. And so that for me was something that I could really sink myself into and start to learn through that. And so I think if I hadn't had technology, then it's really difficult for me to think what would have been the other thing that had captured that focus for me. What would have been the thing that I sunk myself into? And then I think the other side of that question is, if I wasn't doing technology right now, then what would I be doing instead? And I think that the answer is probably I would be doing something extremely similar, because I've always loved writing. And I am trying to bring that as much as possible into the work that I'm doing right now. And I think that the things that attract me to writing and the things that attract me to technology are actually pretty much the same thing. So I love technology in its ability to provide something which is creative and which is expressive and which is kind of tangible. You know, you're creating something and you can see this thing happening, and it's communicating as well. Good code is communicating these ideas. It's another way of expressing something that we've discovered. And so I hope that if I wasn't in technology right now, then I would get to pursue writing. And there's all kinds of things that I would love to be writing. I really love games. I especially love role-playing games, and that's something that I love to write. Little stories, just absolutely anything that gives the opportunity to tell these little stories.
That's a wonderful thing. And indeed, I recognize a lot of things from people, indeed, that hyper focus that you talk about. And if you don't have a diagnosis, then I can imagine that makes things life harder, because people can sometimes don't realize it. And in that sense, I can imagine that once you get that stamp, and you start to understand it a little bit, that it explains a lot of things about earlier in your life. So that is indeed yeah.
Absolutely. I have this conversation with my partner about these labels, right? Because I have a mixed relationship with that, I would say. And as well, this thing, like, I don't like to say, you know, I'm ADHD. I'd rather focus on the specifics. Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? When I was given that label, it was so powerful, because it was like saying, yes, you have had a different experience, and many other people have had this similar different experience, and it is understandable. It was almost like saying there isn't something wrong with you. There is something that is understandable, and that we can support you with. And I think that this is probably an experience that a lot of people have had if they get that diagnosis later in life, is that suddenly everything starts to make sense. And actually, as well, with the medication, a really beautiful analogy that I like about that is, people say it's like putting on glasses for the first time. You know, just everything comes into focus, and it's such a small change, and it just makes such a huge difference in one's life. And I think that as well, I used to regret maybe that I didn't have this thing earlier. And I think now that I'm grateful, because I understand that every single moment has led to me getting that diagnosis at a point in my life where it could really make sense and be a powerful thing for me.
And I can also see that, I don't know how you feel about that, but if I look back at the 20 years ago, for example, the labels really had a lot more bigger stigma than they have today. And I can imagine, if you're in school and had that label back then, that it maybe now people looked at you, you sometimes act strange, but they don't understand it. But if you had that label, it could have given another stigma that might have hindered your life. Especially in schools, I sometimes see that even today, that some teachers don't understand something very technical like dyslexia, that there is a lot of research that show that, yes, there is a reason why people can't write correctly. And if I see that still teachers try to cram in, like, no, you should be better doing and working harder, and it's like, no, that's not it.
Yeah.
If I see this with dyslexia, I can imagine it's even worse with autism or ADHD and everything's like, they still don't understand it. And I don't blame them, because yeah, just like you said, we didn't know a lot. If someone like you who has it and who doesn't even realize you have it, and the close people around you don't realize it, it's because there's a lot of misunderstanding about these things. So let's hopeful by having you and other people talk very openly about it, that we see this a lot more, and let's remove that stigma.
I think you're really right, Eve. And I think as well, like an experience that I had is that it just wasn't something that we discussed. Like when I was growing up, nobody had this diagnosis, which is ridiculous because given the population, like definitely people were struggling with this thing. And I think that you're absolutely right. Like it's not by choice. We weren't having those conversations so much then. There has been a real something that I am so joyed to see is that during my lifetime, that stigma around talking about mental health has really shifted. I feel like I can have so many more open conversations about these things right now than I did before. There's a lot more patience and understanding with those things. And I also think that, yeah, you're right. I hadn't really considered that even when I was younger, having that label, it may have actually been a more negative than a positive experience, because then you're also having to live with that stigma. You're internalizing that shame and then applying it to yourself. And I think that would have been really difficult. And I think as well, we're probably going to talk about observations versus judgments. When we hear terms like this, then we interpret that through our own set of biases, and then it becomes this different thing that we're applying to somebody. And I think that makes it very challenging. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I recognize a lot of these things. So let's move, and probably this is where you were talking about. Let's move to what is your current biggest challenge, and why is that a good thing for you? At least the biggest challenge that you want to share open on the internet, because regularly after this conversation, someone tells me, "Eve, there is actually something a lot more bigger, but I didn't want to say it out loud on camera." So the choice is yours. What do you want to share with the rest of the world?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question because I have a lot of challenges. A lot of those challenges are with myself, and I was thinking, okay, like what's a personal and what's a professional challenge that I'm having right now? I would say the biggest challenge that I have had now that I have this understanding is bringing my whole self to the work that I do, because I know that there's a lot of me, and if I can bring that whole self to what I'm doing, then that can be a really magical thing. I know we're going to talk about motivation a little later. What I find is that I really have to care about what I'm doing if I'm going to produce something that I feel proud of. And so something that I've been really trying to do recently is to, instead of what happened in the past is that I would try and change myself to fit the task. So if I was trying to do a really detail-oriented, boring spreadsheet, I would just be like, no, come on, focus, try harder. You can do this if you just work harder at it. It's not the case. What I have discovered is that being able to do that in tandem with somebody who like has that ability to spot those mistakes quickly, then that just makes it so much easier for me. And I've been really trying to shift the tasks to fit me instead of trying to shift myself to fit the task. So discovering those things that I really do care about, that I think that I can contribute positively to, and just trying to fill my day with those things. Because what I've discovered is that when I do that, what you were saying earlier, like I have so much more energy. I feel so much more whole, so much more comfortable with myself. I feel fulfilled, and I can leave work feeling like I've really done something positive, rather than leaving feeling like I have been unable to do the things that were asked of me. So I think on a personal level, that's something that I've been struggling with. And then I would say professionally.
Wait, well, before you go into that part, why is that a good thing for you? Because that other part of that question really interests me as well. So you've been struggling with that. You've been finding your way around. Is that the good part? Is there something else that is good about that struggle for you?
I think that the good part of it for me is that I have been able to start to really appreciate the strengths that I do have. And we talked about this at the beginning. Like it is really different for me. And I think if I compare myself to other people who I work with who are neurotypical, the difference for me is that I have a lot of ideas all of the time. Like I'm constantly awash with these ideas, my mind is a very noisy place to be, and it's full of words and images, and I adore sharing those things, and it's very comfortable for me to be in that world where I'm imagining, or fantasizing about these things. And those are really valuable things. I think what it has given me as a perspective on the things that we're working with, I often find it very easy to maybe think about, rather than just the symptom, if we're looking at the symptom of something, to maybe start to think about what would be the causes of that symptom and how might we be able to address that. And so very often I'm working at this level kind of up here, and that's really valuable. And it's also really valuable to be working at this level down here where we are trying to do something about that symptom. For me, I'm much more interested in these kind of systemic things and what we can do about that. And it's very easy for me as well, I would say, to challenge things. So if we are given something, if we've been doing something because we've been doing it in the past, I'm very eager to kind of ask those questions and to tease out, why would that be? I think that is something that we would like to see from consultants, right? Is to try and think about why are things the way that they are? So that I think
do I hear it correctly that you're then also able to look at it from multiple aspects, that you can say, okay, this is one part that we talked about. What about the other part? Is that something that you're also good at, or did
I would like to think so. I think that the other thing that this has given me is empathy, in the sense that it's quite easy for me to put myself in somebody else's position. And I think that this is probably why I'm so attracted, especially to role-playing games. This idea that we can inhabit a whole other person, and they have constructed their worldview through all these different experiences. And there is something so wonderful for me to get the opportunity to kind of think about that and to put myself in somebody else's shoes and to think about, how am I experiencing that situation? What am I feeling? What am I going to be motivated to do? I think that that's really powerful. And I also think that that's a big part of the job, right? Because if we're creating a system, we aren't the users of that system. And yet we still need to have the empathy to be able to think, well, okay, how is this affecting my experience? And what I would really like to do, I think, professionally, is to create these delightful experiences. I would really like that the things that I create are delightful for the people who they're for. And so just being able to put little bits of kindness and care into that is a really wonderful thing. And I think we can't do that unless we can imagine the experience of somebody who's affected by these systems.
Yeah, I really like that. Okay, you still wanted to add that professional part to it, or do we move to the next question?
Well, I would, if we have a little bit of time, I would maybe just share one of
we take the time that we wanted to take. I already see that we're about to talk for 1 hour. We haven't nearly touched all the questions, so I think people, well, when you look at this video, you can already see how long it will take. We don't know it, of course, at this moment, but I assume this is going to be a long video. But that's fine. That's fine. Like we discovered, or that we discussed before, we do have the time for having these kind of things. So please go ahead.
I'm extremely grateful for that, Eve, as well. And I think as well, something that you'll probably notice is that, I do have a lot of ideas. It's very interesting for me to kind of explore those and talk about them. So I'll also be grateful if you pull me back to the question, or if we don't have time for anything, then that's also totally fine. I would say one of the struggles that I think I see professionally, and this has been very challenging, is that I think when we look at I think we have really beautiful texts, and I think one of those is extreme programming. I really, those ideas have resonated with me so deeply. I think the agile principles are also very beautiful, and I think that the things that they combine is this idea of the humanity of tech. And I think that the most powerful idea that came out of that for me when I was introduced to them was that what we want to do is to create these autonomous teams, to give them everything that they need to succeed, to remove those obstacles, and to trust that these are smart generalists who care about the work that they're doing, and that therefore they will figure these things out. I think that is such a beautiful thing. I think that I've seen that happening a few times in my life, and when I've seen it happen, it has been such an incredible experience. And it's so easy in that situation to bring my whole self to it. And, when you have a team who really supports each other, who really do care about the quality of the thing that they're building, and are given the time and the space to invest in quality, the outcomes are so much more than you could possibly imagine going into that. What I see a tension with is that I think in tech generally right now, we're seeing a concentration of power. And I think that when that happens, that autonomy necessarily suffers. So I see a lot of organizations that are very hierarchical, organizations where ideas flow from the top, and then the people at the bottom are responsible for the execution of those ideas. And I think that it does a disservice to the craft of creating software. I think that there is so much more that we could be accomplishing if people were given the space that they need to explore a problem and to solve it. I think people generally tend to get into technology because they are interested in, like, solving your problem with the printer, right? Like, there's something, it scratches this itch for us, and we're so interested in the different ways that we could go about doing it, or what that could look like. I think that when that comes into contact with these, especially older, more conservative organizations, that's a very, very challenging thing in terms of, like, a feeling to instill on a team.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to go too much into the detail, but I've read at some point something about how they dealt with Elon at Tesla, with having people dealing with him so that the rest could still work on the things that needed to work on. And so basically solving it, that autocratic way of managing, also as a technical problem. So basically they had, I don't know if it's a team or just a few people working with him to keep him busy, but at the level that he was happy. So it's not about, so they were, I think they were also rather open and transparent about it. So they solved it in what I would see from an engineer as a technical way is, okay, that way we can, everybody's happy and can do it. And I think part of the problem, that's what I see, for example, happening at Twitter, is that, of course, that was a hostile takeover, and that nothing was set in place for that, and then it goes wrong completely. And so I think even in larger corporations, we need to deal with some of that politics and other kind of things. I used to think, or probably in a very naive way, okay, we can do it completely without. In larger corporations, maybe we need something. And a lot of the agilists, we still haven't figured out what's that right balance. Either we see it a little bit like what you say, we see these tools and these teams that work really well, and then we see these larger companies where it's not working, and there should be somewhere, okay, how do we deal with it on another kind of level? I think we still need to engineer our way around these kind of things. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think that we see Conway's law, it pops up everywhere, right? At the moment that we need to have these hierarchical management structures, necessarily then we are foregoing some amount of autonomy that we could be giving to the people who are doing the work. And so I think that that's really challenging. And I think as well, something that I really do like about ThoughtWorks is that we try to be this non-hierarchical organization, and the way that we conceive of leadership and management is really important to me. So, like, Grace Hopper says that you manage processes and you lead people, and exactly. I think that this is the thing, is that we need leadership and not management. And leadership is such a fascinating topic about how one can be an effective leader, and it is the opposite of the thing that you're describing, which is this top down. It's also very often, like you say, it's a hostile takeover. It's not the person who is most informed, or the person who has the most empathy, or the person who understands the outcome of the decisions that they're making the most. It's very often the person with the most money, with the most privilege, who gets to make these choices, and the impacts that they have on a human level are huge. And I think as well that maybe there's a temptation for us as engineers to apply these skills that we have to every problem, so everything becomes a technical problem. But I think that the alternative, and I think that what extreme programming is really trying to say, is that these are all human problems, and so we need to be applying these humane skills to solving them, and that when we can do that, the technical part of it is a part of it, sure. But I don't know what your experience has been, but there has been no job that I have worked in where the most difficult thing to solve has been in some way technical, the most difficult challenges that I've seen have always been social.
Yeah, it's the Jerry Weinberg thing. Like whatever people tell you, it's always a people problem. It's something similar like that. Okay, let's. We could just like you say, you are a very passionate person talking about lots of these topics. So my question there is: do you know what drives you? Do you know where that passion is coming from? You have any idea there?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about motivation before as well, and one of the ADHD experiences I would say is that I need to have intrinsic motivation in the task to be able to bring my whole self to it. I would say, I mean, I don't know, but from what I've heard from people who don't have ADHD, then very often it's this extrinsic motivation. So I may think that if I get this thing done, then maybe I'm going to get paid for it, or I'll get recognition or something else. But for me, it really does have to be the thing itself is giving me something that I need, and usually that is something like stimulation, or it's a opportunity to be creative, something like that. And so I would say that the thing that is giving me a lot of motivation is I was really touched by your interview as well with Emily Bach. And the thing that she was saying is that I want to make people's lives better. And that truly is the thing that's driving me. And I think that we have this wonderful opportunity, especially as agile consultants. We think about this team maybe as being the smallest unit that we're focused on. If we can go into those teams and just make life better for the people working there, then for me, that focus is making people's lives better. As a nice consequence, also, you get all these other things, right? People become more productive, they care more. But the thing that we're changing really is the well-being of the people. And so that's the thing that motivates me. And if I get the sense that the work that I've done has made things better for people, then that is absolutely the thing that keeps me going. I think that is such a precious gift to be given the opportunity to work with people to make their work lives better. This is something that we have to spend a lot of our time doing. I think that thing needs to be as humane as possible. And I think that by focusing ourselves on making it that way, then that's the way that we're going to solve these other problems about, cycle time and quality and everything else.
I really like how you put it, because indeed you focus on helping making people's lives better, and actually that solves the company's problem of productivity and everything. And what is really interesting is that people sometimes tell us as coaches, yeah, don't worry about that, focus on the productivity. No, it's actually the opposite. It's by caring about people, making sure that people feel themselves better, that they will be productive. And so, and this is not about adding an extra football table or something else. No, it's really about really caring about people, like that people feel like, okay, this is, my life is actually better. I can, and that is whatever that means for you. That means maybe less noisy. For other people, that mean, and like you said, also the lighting might be better. All kind of things. And for some, it's maybe the keyboards and whatever. And by doing that, all of a sudden, people are intrinsically more motivated and have much more of these things. So that is, and it solves everybody's problem, but the focus is really on, like you say, is helping the people, and all of a sudden, people feel much more appreciated, and that's the thing,
Yeah,
and that's the
listened to
interesting
and
part.
understood. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say I don't care that much about the external motivation, but for me, is when you focus on people, there is the appreciation, which is some kind of external motivation, but it's by helping the people themselves that people feel appreciated. And of course, this is not saying that people don't want to be paid and everything. We need to be paid fairly, because if that's not solved, everything else doesn't matter either. But I think in tech, most of us, it's pretty okay, even if there is some unbalance for some people. But once we're past that, when we really create the environment where people can do it, can shine, then everything else is just solved miraculously. And it's not, it looks miraculously to managers that don't understand it, but actually there's a lot of research and a lot of things that is. And so what I'm hearing is just like with Emily, that is the big thing that drives you. Do you have any idea where that comes from? Is that something that you've learned? Could you pinpoint it when you learned that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I guess that's always been a part of it. A part of me, I guess, that there is something intrinsic about the desire to make things better, to imagine different ways that we can relate, and to try and see that happening. I don't think that I have ever not felt this drive yet to try and improve things. And I think it's a little bit difficult as well, because I think if we don't understand some of the values and the principles, then if we just get to practice, then it can be about trying to fix things for people, which is incredibly condescending, and it is actually harming more than it is helping. I think that if we consider more broadly this idea that we're humans and that we feel things and that we have these needs, and that we can collaborate on strategies to get these needs met, and I think that is a really beautiful thing. I think as well, very often it comes into tension. In preparation just for this interview, I was going back through my PDF of extreme programming, and I think every time I read that, like something else jumps out to me. And the thing that really stuck with me this time was reading this point about humanity and what do people need to be good developers. Basic safety, so like you say, that you're going to be paid. Fear of job loss threatens this need. This need for belonging, to be able to identify with a group. Growth, the opportunity to expand their skills and perspective, which can lead to self-actualization, which is a really wonderful thing. Intimacy as well, like what a beautiful thing to include, the ability to understand and be understood by others. And this last one, accomplishment, I think is the hardest thing that I see right now, the opportunity and ability to contribute to society. I think there's something that is happening generally in tech right now, is that there is a little bit of a crisis in terms of purpose. So I think very often the products that we're being asked to create have these externalized costs, which I think are becoming so much more clear to people. And I think something that I do see folks struggle with is that we are very often being asked to build things which we don't necessarily believe in, and which we can see do not have a positive impact on society. And I think that is really similar to this problem of power flowing from the top and asking people to work on these things. And there's only so much we can do, right? So we arrive in these situations that have already been formed, and I can do all of these things to try and make you feel more safe, and to try and change some of your development processes. What I can't change fundamentally is the thing that you're being asked to produce. And I think if we don't have a comfortable relationship with both the way that we're working in terms of what it costs both us and other people and the planet, and also the product that we're creating and the costs that are represented in that, then I can't really do anything to fulfill this need. Maybe what I can do is help people to be able to articulate and express this discomfort that they're feeling. But okay, now we're just aware of this problem, whereas maybe in the past we were able to more safely ignore it. So I think that is a really difficult thing.
I want to go back a little bit to what you said about not solving a problem for someone else is condescending. I think that what I hear you say is that when you solve it without them asking you to solve it, or when so sometimes people complain or say something, and then some of the tech people, and me included, our eyes sometimes jump in. Okay, I can solve it. Wait a minute. Maybe that's not what was the question, and maybe it's more like I want to complain, and okay, I don't like that when people do that, but sometimes we all need to rumble about it a little bit. Sometimes it's like, okay, I need some help, but don't solve it for me. Just show me how to solve it, and this kind of thing. And this is where I think is indeed the condescending people. Like, okay, I take over and I solve it for you. Wait a minute, that's not helping. Even if my role as a consultant, I'm hired to help you. for me, I see it as I'm hired to help you, that you can solve it yourself, and that I can quickly go away as fast as possible, that you can do it on your own. So, but it's very tempting, or at least that's what I did when I was earlier on in my career. Like, okay, jump in, solve it, and then go away, which is. And I think, and I see a lot of people around me that are sometimes frustrated. Yeah, but they asked for help, I solved it, and now they're unhappy. Why is that? Yeah, because maybe they asked for help, but they didn't want you to solve it. They asked for help and tell me how to solve it. And I think that's a really hard balance to sometimes see. Do you recognize that as well for yourself, or how does that?
100%, yeah. I think this is so difficult, right? And when I had the opportunity to join grads as they were starting to learn some of these skills, then we would be very deliberate where we talk about this kind of line. So it's the line between like stepping in and stepping back, giving people enough space to make mistakes and then be able to reflect on why that is the case, versus clearly seeing that they're going to go down this big long path that isn't going to take them anywhere, that isn't going to really help them out. That is so difficult, and it's so subtle, and it's impossible to know if we've got it right or not. I think like coaching gives us a lot of these skills. We would so much prefer to just ask questions, to believe that. I think this is the thing. If we want something solved, we're very rarely asked, I think, to actually just go and solve that thing. You know, like, oh, you just need a semicolon at the end of this line, it's done. What we need to be doing is to give people the opportunity to realize that there needs to be a semicolon at the end of the line, and that is so difficult. We have to pick people up from where they are, and we have to understand what journey they need to have that realization inside themselves. And I really think that when we step in, then we do somebody a disservice, because we are depriving them of that opportunity to learn and grow. And I think that if we can create opportunities for people to grow, then that is one of the most wonderful things that we can give to people.
Yeah, we take their how do you call it, their desire to ask for help. I when you explained about that semicolon, I had immediately flashback to a teacher of French when I was in high school, and she was always jumping in. I was really bad at French. Let's make that clear. I was really like, I had to, I just during Corona, I saw some of the points I had. It was like 20%, 30%, so really bad. But she jumped into it, and at the moment that I didn't feel the need, I knew that I was bad, but I didn't always understand at the moment that she was jumping in. And later on, I realized that because she was jumping in, I didn't know yet at what level I had a problem. And so I was really bad at asking for help, not only due to her. There was, I can pinpoint to a lot of other things, but this didn't help me asking for help for French. And yeah, for me, that was really like, okay, I think you as a teacher, you try to do the good thing, but actually you had the opposite effect because I didn't realize it. And I would have much more preferred that you let me run into the wall and do something wrong, whatever. And of course, it needs to be safe. So it's running into a wall is okay. Running into the highway is probably not okay. So we need to find that right balance. But once we do that, then I would actually, and that actually happened to me later on in life, then I would realize, okay, this is some part of that language I don't understand. And now I'll ask for help. And then immediately I jump higher. And like what you described, asking for help, it's such an important thing. And when you explained it, it reminded me a little bit what we did. I was a coach in Coder Dojo Ghent, so where we teach young children how to program. And one of the guidelines we gave our coaches was, don't touch the keyboard and don't touch the mouse. So if there's a child asking for help, you're not allowed to type it in for him or her. You're not allowed to point it. You just need to say, okay, please click there and click there. And of course, we didn't always follow that rule. There were moments that we did it. But in general, the idea was we're not touching these things. We need them. And what I find interesting is that some of these children, they ask for, you know how children are. They're very creative. So they want to do something. And we as coaches, we have no idea how to do it. So we click, we tell a little bit this or that, and you can try this or that. And you don't know the number of occasions that a child looks at me and says, oh, but you don't know it either. Okay, then you can go away. I'll try myself. And just the idea for them that you as a coach, you also don't know that you need to figure it out is so powerful to children. And I
Yeah.
assume it's the same thing to your students when in your ThoughtWorks Academy.
Yeah, I think that is so important as well. And I think that it's vulnerability again, right? Just to be able to say, I don't know, hey, because I think people ask for help. And as well, I think that we go through this education system, which is so much about rote learning, and it's about being able to get the perfect answer the first time. And it does such a disservice, right? Because it's not about the process. And so people ask for help and they're like, hey, why isn't this thing working? And then you join them and you're like, okay, well, so what does the error message say? And I don't know. You understand this code better than I do. Like, I think that what I can bring to a situation is a sensitivity. And I loved what you were saying about the printer earlier, right? So like you ping it. We develop this kind of sensitivity by going through the pain of things not working for us. And so we learn very quickly when things hurt us because we really don't want to be in that situation again. And so we get all of these tools to prevent us from getting hurt again in the future. And so when I join and then I'm like, okay, what does the error message say? And then people are like, but I don't want to understand it. I just want you to fix it for me. I just want this thing to work. And it's really frustrating for the other person. And so you just have to be patient, I think, and empathetic and just try and talk them through it. And stating up front, I don't know. Like, I don't know anything about this, but I can try and support the process.
And of course, because the error message says it, this reminds me, like my son last year, he had some programming task for university, and the compiler was and the linter were giving all kind of error messages. And I said, okay, you have now feedback from your teacher about some of these things, but before you jump into that, I would advise you to fix all the linter and the compiler messages, all these things that he's complaining about, and fix that. And he didn't really like it, but in the end he did it, or I helped a little bit, but we fixed, I think, most of that. And all of a sudden, half of the problems that his teacher was talking about were fixed. And it's like, oh, okay, so actually that tool is helping me. So it's there is a reason why these messages are there. There is a reason, and they didn't. And I have to admit, even with all my programming experiences, some of these linter messages, it looked like, what is it saying? I'm not sure. And why is it saying that? But all of a sudden you realize, if I fix that, then a real user problem is also fixed. So there was some kind of code, some kind of strange thing. So just indeed, people new to programming explain, there is a reason why these messages are there. And okay, maybe some of them you don't care, because if it's about a space too much or too little, okay, that you might ignore it. I like it because it helps to keep the code clean, and I see very quickly where I messed around with some code. But I understand that you want to ignore that, but most of the other messages are really really important messages. And I think that's the thing, that when you talk about, okay, what does the error message say? Oh, I don't know, I haven't read it. Well, maybe you should read it. Maybe there is something in there. Oh, it says I miss a semicolon, but that's not true. On this line there is a semicolon. Yeah, well, you need to understand, if a compiler complains about a semicolon, it's typically not on the line that it says. It's typically the line above, or some lines above, something like that. And it's like, when you can explain these kind of things, like you say, when people are ready for it. That's okay. I want to jump into that next question. We talked about already some of the challenges, but what do you consider your biggest achievement if you look back at what you've done? And of course, the biggest achievement right so far, because there still is a big time ahead.
I think that the thing that I'm proudest of is that after I had the opportunity with ThoughtWorks University, then I had another opportunity to work on one of the trainings that we give within ThoughtWorks, which is the Tech Lead Development Program. And I think that there's a very rich history there as well, because we had Pat Kwa, who was the first person to deliver it for us. And then it's changed, it's transformed, it's mutated. And it was really just so satisfying for me. I got to take the opportunity to see where else we were talking about this role. It's a really challenging role, because I think that it is qualitatively different to being a developer, to stepping into that tech lead role. And so although it has a lot of very similar elements, it really is a very different thing. I think it's really difficult to make that jump. I think that we have to give so much support and understanding to people. And it was just super fascinating for me to read so much about what we talk about when we talk about leadership, or what are the things that we feel would be the curriculum that you would like to give a tech lead, such that they can then go and excel in that role. I got the opportunity to look at the material for it, and I delivered two batches, which is actually where I met Matteo talking about nonviolent communication. So it was also a wonderful opportunity to meet people, and it was really satisfying for me. I think the other thing that I would like to say, and probably we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about doing things remote, is the opportunity to experiment with how we deliver things. I think that, especially for me, the single most precious resource that I have is my attention. And I really do not like being in a situation where I don't think that my attention is being respected. And I think that when we're doing these things remote, that we have to make so much of an effort to engage people, so much more than we would be able to do in person. In person, I feel like I have all of these tools. I can see you, I can reach out to you, you're right there. Remote, it's so much more difficult. And I think the other thing that we struggle with is getting people to contribute in a safe way. So very often when we do these instructor-led trainings, a pattern that I have seen really often is that we ask questions. We don't always ask very good questions as well. Like, we'll be talking about TDD and the session will start. We'll be like, hey folks, who can tell me what TDD is? Well, why am I asking you that? This is a session about TDD. I'm not going to get a better response from somebody in the audience about what it is. Like, clearly I want you to have my understanding of it. And so we're asking these questions that aren't particularly valuable, and then it's the same people who are responding. So we've also been looking at ways that we can make sure that everybody is able to contribute and do it in a safe way. Some of the things that we've been experimenting with is having this idea of a rota, so that we're looking at the next person. That person can always say, like, I don't have anything to contribute, or like, I don't know what this thing is, in which case we can pass it. It's an opportunity to make sure that we are being understood. And actually, one of the things that Matteo gave me, which I think about really often, is that he said, if you haven't understood something, then I haven't been clear enough. And I think that is really true. Like, when we're asking these questions, we really need to understand, have I taken you on that journey? If you haven't understood, then the problem is here, not here, because I haven't given you all the steps to get to where I would like you to be. And so I need to reflect on that. Some of the other stuff that we do is tools like we use Mentimeter, and then there are all these different things which are really similar. To be able to get people to contribute anonymously is a really powerful thing, because it then means that if I'm facilitating it, then I can read these things, but they aren't attached to people. People feel much safer, I think, contributing in that situation, and they can be a lot more open because they're not attached to it. And so I really adored the opportunity to develop that. Yes, please.
I want to go into that part that you say about anonymously, because basically that is something that is a lot easier remote than yes. Physically, because if you physically, okay, well, I need an ID box, but I see who put people, so that's you typically not working. It indeed reminds me of a story that my daughter had at some point, that she said, okay, during Corona, I was able to, I had my teacher who was remote. I was able to ask some questions, and that was not anonymously, but she was able to ask questions to the teacher directly, where none of her classmates would be able to see that. So that gave her some kind of safety to asking a question. And then a year later, she would have they needed to go back to the school, but there was one teacher who, for medical reasons, had to stay at home. And because of the whole setup was set up for Corona, this teacher was still able to teach, but now this teacher was at home and everybody was in the class. And that dynamic shifted. And for the school, it looks like, oh, this is still a remote training, but it's not, because you're no longer able to ask your remote questions where nobody else sees it, because you're in a beamer and the teacher is remote, but it's a completely different environment. It's much more hybrid, and that removed that possibility. And it made me really think about, okay, what is it that indeed, like you say, the anonymously, the fact that you can ask questions that maybe not anonymous to the teacher, which might bring other kind of problems, but at least it's a safety, especially for teenagers, that I can ask a question to the teacher without my friends seeing me, and especially in age 12 to 16, 18, a lot of people have troubles being open to their vulnerable, and in both directions. That sometimes is, I don't want them to see that I don't understand that, but in other directions is, I don't want them to see that I'm interested in this topic, because I might be looking at the nerd and I don't want to have that kind of thing. So in all kind of directions, you see that kind of thing. So I think it's really important that you stress out indeed how what remote is adding in these kind of contexts. I think that's
And when we started going remote, I really hated it. Like it wasn't working for me. I think it's really difficult, especially if we're neurodiverse. Having that big shift, it was so challenging. But I think that having gone through that process, I'm really grateful for it, because I've discovered all of these tools that I wouldn't have explored otherwise, and I wouldn't lose them. I would bring them now to in-person things that we do. I think as well with the questions are such a wonderful thing to be given, and so our language is super important. I think when we deal with questions, we need to be grateful for the fact that we've been given a question. We also need to think about the language that we use when we receive them. One thing that I really don't appreciate is, of course. If somebody asks you a question and you say, of course, then it's also saying you shouldn't have asked that question. You should know this thing. But if we want to build safety, there can't be a should. Where you are is where you are, and that's legitimate, and we have to pick you up and take you. Yeah.
It's very tempting. It's very easy as a trainer to use some kind of stop words. That is actually, we use this then we can figuring our thoughts and know how to respond in a better way. Or this reminds me of a story that my father used to tell. He was having, and goes back like 40, 50 years, 50 years, that he was at university, and there was a teacher in front of the room, 300 people, said, well, and you can easily go from, and he stopped talking. He went out of the room and stayed out of the room for 20, 30 minutes, and then came back. Like I said, we can easily go from this to there, and continued. And it's like, what? And so in my father's mind, it's like, yeah, he missed something. He had to look it up, whatever. And then he didn't even explain it. Maybe he had a technical problem that he needs to go to the bathroom or whatever. But the fact that he did it without explanation gave that idea that there was something that was not easy. And it was actually something that took my father a few hours to figure out how to go from step A to step B. So he at least feels that even for that teacher at that moment felt completely wrong about saying it, but he never acknowledged it. And it's a little bit like, of course, but no, well, wait a minute.
Yeah, but actually, I don't know. That is such a powerful phrase, right? I don't know, because, and there are so many things that I don't know. Like, that is such a helpful answer for me. I don't know. Let's find out together. How would we discover the answer to this question? The resources are almost always there, right? And so it's so much about the process, giving people the permission to be wrong, to explore, to experiment. I think these are all the things we need to be bringing to those situations, definitely.
Yeah, when I did 5 years of training, giving .NET training, and it really was a hard time sometimes when I got a question. And in the end, after a couple of months, I realized very quickly, okay, if I get a question and I don't know the answer, really my answer was at that moment like, okay, I don't know now. I will try to figure it out, and tomorrow I'll explain you. And that was so much better. Okay, I could have gone, let's explore it together. I felt it difficult to do that sometimes when 20, 30 other people in the room. So I didn't feel comfortable at that. But just the fact that I could say, I don't know yet, I'll discover it, or I'll look it up, or after the course we can discover it together. These kind of things are so powerful. Just telling people. And in the beginning it felt like, no, I should know because I'm paid, and I'm like, I'm the expert. So like, no, you're the expert in figuring stuff out. You're not the expert in knowing everything. At least that's how it feels to me now. But it's so hard because we talked about earlier about Coder Dojo, or I talked about it, and when you said about teachers, that you brought in this aspect of teaching just having a one-off. You either know it or you don't know it. the teachers had the hardest time in Code Dojo to not solve the problems for the children. The people who were actually doing their work as kindergarten teachers or whatever kind of thing, for them it's like, no, you cannot do that. The child asks a question, you cannot figure it out. Your whole philosophy of Code Dojo is wrong. It's like, yeah, it's different. And for me, one of the reasons why we did it is that children, Code Dojo in Ghent this is on a Saturday morning. Children have been on the school banks for 5 days in a row. They have already had teachers telling them how it is. And so the Saturday morning, they come out of intrinsic motivation, or at least that's we hope. We hope that it's not the parents, but it's really the children. Let's give them a place where they can discover stuff. And it's so hard for them. It's so hard.
Well, I think one of the other experiences that we had is that it's not just grads that join us, it's also career changes. And I think a real distinction that I've seen with career changes is that, yeah, I guess as well, the intrinsic motivation, they have shifted what they're doing in their lives to get to this point. And so it's already a self-selected sample of people who have learned how they learn. And I think that this is not something, I mean, I can only talk for myself. Never when I was at school did we ever consider that people learn in different ways and that it's important to understand how we learn. And also I learn in a very different way from a lot of people. And to be confronted with people who were so excellent at understanding how to learn, like it gave me so much. It's very cliche to say, well, I like to think that they teach me, but it really was that experience. And I really love as well, I read Emily Back's book about the coding dojo, and we've been setting one up here in Amsterdam. And one of the really powerful things for me from the 4 Rules of Simple Design from the code retreat is this idea of throwing code away. So it's no longer about the artifact that we're creating. It's purely about the process of arriving at it. And unless we are safe to destroy our artifacts, we can't really have that, right? Because there's always this idea that we'll be judged on it.
Yeah, I just last night I watched, I have no idea what kind of episode or whatever, but it was an episode where The Edge was talking to someone else about creativity, so the guitarist, and he was talking about every time that we sit down with the idea, let's create a song, it basically never was a good song. And when we're just fooling around and playing and trying with instruments and trying to create sounds, all of a sudden we had something. And then he was talking about, I was playing around with my guitar, and I found a chord progression that I really liked. And then the bell rang. And so he was at his door and it was like, yeah, but if I don't record this chord progression, I will forget, because this is how my brain works. So he went to the door playing the guitar and then, opened the door, and the postman was there. It was like, he was still playing that chord progression. And he was saying to the postman, like, okay, put that package there and then please close the door after you. And he kept playing it. And then only then, I recognize the song because he was playing it during the interview. And there was a song that came out in 88 or 89. So it definitely some recording in 87 or something like that, which is, of course, at that time, there were no phones that could do recording. So we actually had to go into his, I assume, private study to do the recording or something like that. So, but he was explaining just casually. So I kept playing for 4 or 5 minutes, trying to not forget it. And this is so interesting on how creativity works and how he already at that time, and I think he was about 26 or 27 about that time, realized, this is how my brain works. If I stop playing it even just for 1 minute, I will forget this, because it's not yet, there is no muscle memory. So he kept playing it and just 3-4 chords. And I was like, wow, this is so interesting. And yeah.
I think that's really interesting as well. Yeah, that's a really beautiful idea, just having the self-awareness to be able to know that. But I think that the other part of that is this thing about creativity. We can't force this thing, right? Coding is a creative pursuit. If you want to create something which is quality, then we necessarily have to be able to be creative with it. And it's similar for me. Like I love writing. I love writing these little stories. If I sit myself down, I'm like, write a story. I got nothing. I need this inspiration. Where does that inspiration come from? It for me, it comes from being put in an environment where I feel inspired. And I think that that's something that in this role, we are able to change, right, the environment to be able to create spaces where people can feel inspired. What we can't do is sit somebody down and say, like, be creative, like, here's the blank file in your IDEs, write some beautiful code. No, we need to have that thing that, and we do that through collaboration and vulnerability and play, and all of these things are so important to inspiring that in us. And so when we can create these environments, then the outcome is going to be something beautiful.
I like that. At the same time, I think part of creating the environment is also creating the time. I remember one of the tips that I read about writing that works for me is that's okay. You just have to write and keep writing. So for me, one of the things is, okay, have a blank canvas and I don't know what to write, but start writing and keep writing. And of course, half of it, like you say, might be rubbish, but I need to get into the practice of writing, and every day writing 500 words or whatever, and keep writing. And that is for me the hardest part. If afterwards is okay, what things will I keep and what things will I throw away? But I've learned in the beginning, I was thinking about when I was 16, writing something. It's like, okay, you write something and it should be there. And if you write a poem or something like that, it feels like it should be perfect right from the start. No, I've learned that many of the music that I love, some of the poets, they actually work maybe a year on a song, finding the exact rhythm, finding the exact words that are working. And it's like, this is a lot of craft. So yes, there is the creativity, but there is also creating that environment. And part of it for me is, okay, let's sit down and let's be a full year in a room together every day, writing music and not waiting for that big inspiration. No, we keep being together, but we just know that part of it will be thrown away. And that is what I like about code retreats, was you keep doing it, you work on it, but the intention is to throw it away. And the very first time I've been into one, and I see it with almost everyone, the first time they come to code retreats, is like, what do you mean I need to throw this away? I just worked half an hour on this. I'm really proud of it. And now you tell me to throw it away. Yes, because it's that practice.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a little, I think it's a little bit of both. We need to do the practice, and then all of a sudden you will recognize, okay, it's like playing guitar. You need to practice all your scales until you're really good and you know how to play all these chords. And only then you will play around and find a riff. And of course, if while practicing you find a riff, I hope you record it, but you really need to practice the scales and the chords and whatever. So
and I think Emily as well used that metaphor about music, and I think as well for the dojo, right? It's exactly the same thing. It's developing that muscle, but I think as well that the really powerful thing there is having some structure to it. So having something to kind of play off, because yeah, I mean, for me, that blank canvas that's too much. And I like this idea of like enabling constraints, like that's the thing that allows me to start getting going. I think when we can understand, the restrictions, then that's where we can get really inspired.
Okay, let's move to the next question about personal agility. And I think we kind of touched already some of these things, but do you have a tip to share about, okay, what is, to share with other people?
I think that we probably covered a lot of the stuff that I wanted to say here. So I pulled this quote out of, again, from Extreme Programming, which is build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. And then what I wanted to say about that is that if we want to do that, then, and we've talked about this a lot, then the most fundamental, the single thing that is going to enable us to do that is creating psychological safety. Creating psychological safety is incredibly difficult. It is so easy to squander it. It'll go in a moment. I, to be honest, have had so few discussions with people about intentionally imbuing this sense of safety on a team. And I think that is disproportionate versus the importance and the power of what it can give people. And I think as well, like I've had a few opportunities to really experience psychological safety on a team. It's been life-changing. It has been truly life-changing for me to feel that. And so as well, I want everybody to get to have that experience and that opportunity.
We can move on, I think, but I want to talk a little bit about next week. There is an interview with Yatum going live where he talks about a game for psychological safety. So I will ask people to, if you're interested, I think 7 April this one will go live. After the interview, I had the same reaction as you had, of like, wow, you have a game about that. So I immediately downloaded it. We played it. I play it a little bit different as what he explains it, but for me, it's like if I have a group of 5 or 6 people, this helps really. So I would advise you to look it up, and in the video is of course only explaining it briefly, but in the video links, the show notes, I will link to the game as well, because like you say, it helps so much. It's basically giving you some questions and situations where the team can then discuss about what does that do for themselves, and just having these discussions really help, I think, for psychological safety. I've now done it in with even people who are not a team, so just having these discussions, and it was interesting to see multiple teams reacting differently to these kind of questions. So it really helps a lot, and it shows a lot about these things. So I will definitely link it. I'll probably, when this video goes live, I will link the game as well, because
that sounds really fascinating. I'm excited to see what that's like. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
So the next question was about remote work, and like you said, we already talked a little bit. Is there still something you want to add about remote work? Like, okay, is there one tip that you think that we didn't talk about yet?
Maybe it's more of a request, I would say, is that, again, like, we just have to be so intentional. Please don't squander people's attention. It is so much that we're asking of people for their time, for their focus, to sit, especially on Zoom calls, and we know how exhausting, how enervating that situation is. We have to be so much more structured. I think that now when we are asking for people's time, we really have to be able to articulate why we need that, why something should be synchronous instead of asynchronous. We really have to adapt every single aspect of the way that we're doing these things to accommodate for the situation that we find ourselves in. And I would also just ask, like, give people everything that they need. Schedule breaks, just make sure that people are following along. A question that I find really helpful is, how are we feeling, just to get a sense about where people are. My focus is not good. And so if I'm on an extended call, especially where I don't get to interact, it's not really a useful way for me to spend that time. And I'm certain that it's similar for everybody else.
Yeah, I think, well, if I look at what my children, for example, if the remote, some of the trainings and they get at schools is like what they discovered in Corona is like, oh, actually, I like to listen to some of these videos in double speed, and the moments that I really don't understand quickly, because some things I understand very quickly, I do double speed. Other things I don't understand, I might listen multiple times. I might do it at smaller speed, or I might pause to look at an image that's on the screen. But that gives me that opportunity. If, of course, you force me to follow it real life, I can go faster, I can't stop it, I can't. No, that's the extra thing that you say is about, okay, give me the opportunity and to do it asynchronously. Let's follow on a different way. Let's remove. Yeah, let's do. I was forced to watch something at the client live, and turns out I thought it was live, but it was actually a recording, and so I thought I was needed to listen in live because that's it. And turns out it was a recording from a few days earlier, and I was like, well, wait a minute. If you would have told me before, it's interesting. I'm not saying that whatever they said was not interesting, but there are some parts that I really know because I'm really involved in that. So I would have preferred to listen to the whole thing more than an hour at double speed, and then focus on the parts that I totally didn't know, and there listen much more carefully. I wasn't able to ask any questions. Nobody in the audience was at, well, there were people in the room, but that was recorded a few days earlier, so these people had any questions, and I was interested about these questions, and because I had similar kind of questions. So it was a good way of doing it hybrid and remote, but then don't tell everybody from the company to all listen in at the same time. offer it asynchronously, and I will listen to it at the multiple thing. And yeah, it's use that kind of thing. I really like that you say what is synchron, what is asynchron. Let's go into that.
And I think it's also a little bit of a thing about autonomy potentially, because as well, give people, say what the outcomes that you want are and let people fulfill them. Don't give them the strategy, watch a video, like say, you need to have this understanding. The last thing I would maybe just say really quickly is that something that I was introduced to recently that I have really appreciated, that I've been trying to apply to everything that I've been doing, is if we're doing exercises in breakout rooms, I think that can be really effective. Give people some time before they go into the breakout rooms to think about what they want to say, because not everybody is able to think on the spot. And we've also been playing with some of the liberating structures. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're so much more easier in person, but because we're remote doesn't mean that we stop doing these things. It just means that we have to understand how we can do it successfully using the tools that we have. It is possible. Like we've been playing with 1, 2, 4 all using Zoom breakout rooms, and it's not pleasant, but the result is still such a powerful thing. So to take those things that we were doing when we were in person, make them work remote, or discover new ways of doing these things, because like we said, there are remote tools that are more powerful than the stuff that we were doing in person.
Yeah, I really like that you talk about that. It's how would I say it? Yeah, the liberating structures. And I was thinking, actually, if you look right behind me, there is the book from the Liberating Structures.
Oh yeah.
So it is indeed one of these books that that really interests me. Yeah, that I do think is important to talk about. And like you say, remote is harder than physically. So that's definitely something, that we need to think about. That is. Yeah, I'm trying to find the words to add it, but yeah, I think it's really important for people to think about these kind of things. What do we do remote? And actually, we at my current clients, we do an agile week twice a year, and one of the things that we're doing is teaching people about some activities. So giving it for Scrum Master, product owners, and so last time we did. So 5 or 6 sessions about liberating structures, half of them physically, half of them remote, because for the exact same reason that you're talking about, like, let's experience people, let's talk about it, but not just talk, but let's really experience what does that mean? How do you do 1, 2 for all in a remote session, and how do you do it? And then you run into the tools problem, because if in that particular company we didn't have all the Teams was installed in a way that we didn't always have all the rights for everyone, and so then you run into that. And so that this is where you see, you ask us to help people to collaborate, but you don't install the tools in a way that we can collaborate. So have people think about that. That was really interesting to have these discussions with the people at the right level that understand, okay, this is how you want to use breakout rooms. And we just thought that you needed it for, no, we want it on a day-to-day basis if we're working with teams. But this is a small team. But maybe a breakout room to 2 people can be interesting when we work remotely as well. So these kind of questions were interesting. Okay, I want to move to the next question about a book, and I think you already talked a little bit about it, but what is the book that you want to talk about?
So the book that I want to talk about is Nonviolent Communication by Rosenberg.
That's the one, right?
This is it, exactly, yeah, Language for Life. I was introduced to this, I guess, through the Tech Lead Development Program. We talk about nonviolent communication, and I think often when we talk about it as a kind of process, right? So there are these 4 steps, you do the 4 steps, you've communicated nonviolently, you're good to go. When I got to, so the other thing that I've discovered recently is audiobooks, and they are perfect for me because sitting down to actually read text is really difficult. Audiobooks are wonderful. I can do something else at the same time. If my hands are occupied, then I pay more attention. So it's solving a lot of problems for me. That book is narrated.
I want to go to that because that brings me to what you said earlier on, when you need to focus physically in a training. People sometimes complain you're not paying attention because you're doing something with your hands, doodling or whatever, and people think, yeah, you're drawing, so you're not paying attention. And that is actually really important what you say there, because it's by occupying your hands you actually are able to pay attention much more. And this is something completely misunderstood in trainings, in workshops, but also in meetings, that people say, it looks like you're drawing. Why are you not paying attention? Well, you don't understand how my brain works. It's actually, for some people like you, much more interesting to keep doodling and to keep doing whatever with your hands to actually pay attention. And that's important. Sorry that I wanted to interrupt, but I think
no,
that's an important part.
thank you so much, Eve, as well, because I think for me that's become so normalized now. Very often, if it's a long session, I'll be like, hey folks, you're going to see me playing with something in front of me. I actually have, the greatest thing for me is that I have this big of Lego, and so, you know, like I can just pull something apart and put it back together. When my hands are occupied, it frees my brain, and so I can give you my full attention. But just as well, yeah, like we say, like just having the opportunity to say up front, I'm going to be doing this thing. It's such a tiny affordance. It costs you nothing. But I think that we just need to have the understanding that I'm not being rude. I'm actually being very considerate because I care about what you're saying. And so to give it my full attention, I need to be occupying my hands. Yeah.
It's really important that people understand that is actually helping the meeting, and it's not hindering. And a lot of people don't understand it. And I've seen things in schools. There were a few years back there was some trend where children were playing with some kind of fiddlers.
They're fidget spinners, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then they removed it from schools because they said, well, it's people are so much busy. Yes, but then you remove also the part for the people like you who have ADHD, where it's actually very useful to have something in their hands and to fiddle with it. That actually helps you. And it's more that the teachers were distracted by these fiddlers than the children were distracted. And I can imagine some other children might get distracted, but you need to find ways in your classrooms and in your meetings how to keep the attention of people. Anyway, you wanted to talk, you were talking about that book and about audiobooks.
I think that's a beautiful segue, right? So I'm an expert on myself. There is no better expert in the world than myself. I have been myself my entire life. I've really struggled with this topic, you know, and I found out some things about it. Yeah. If the thing that I need to do is to focus, I am going to be able to give a strategy which works in that situation. So when we're talking about autonomy, we're also talking about this need, right? The thing that nonviolent communication gave me was this introduction to the idea that we have needs. We all have needs. They're all very similar for some of them. For some of us, some needs are maybe more pressing than others. It's legitimate to have those needs. That's what makes us human. And then we're trying to get those needs solved. We also have all of these emotions. And I think as well, being British, I don't know what your experience with this is. I never cultivated this language of emotion to the point where when I was confronted with, for instance, the inventory of feelings, or with something that I really like to bring to a lot of trainings right now is the wheel of feels, and get people to locate on that where they're feeling. I didn't think that I had access to these things. I didn't think that I felt them. When we start to understand that that's the thing that unites us, is that we have this internal world, because this is where our emotions exist, which are causing us to feel certain ways, that when we are feeling challenging things, it's because our needs aren't being met. And that when we're in that situation that produces conflict, then it gives us the compassion, I think, to be able to understand that is the same for everybody. And that people are really, and I do truly believe this, people are trying to do their best. People are trying to do their best in really difficult situations. So nonviolent communication, I thought it was going to be this, kind of this management-y kind of, like you do this, you do this, you do this. It is this really gorgeous philosophy which has unlocked so much understanding for me and compassion. And I think about the ideas in that book every day, and it has opened a whole world for me of other things that relate to this. And I think as well, going back through extreme programming just recently, like it is echoing the ideas of nonviolent communication. when we're talking about humanity, like that is such an important thing, having this understanding that we experience these really similar things. And as well, that this idea about observations and judgments is so powerful. We judge all of the time. We interpret what is happening through our own set of lenses, which are based on the experiences that we've had. That is necessary, you know, like we're these pattern matching language monkeys. We have to react very quickly because this is a survival mechanism. What we can try to do is to engage some of the higher brain functions that we have to understand, like, where is that coming from? Do I want to actually act on this? My understanding is that a lot of the higher functions that we have in our brains are actually stopping us from doing things rather than causing us to do things. And so when we can spend more time in that space that we have between stimulus and response, then it allows us to live much more authentic lives. And when we're able to be authentic, then it enables all of these other things. We can be vulnerable, we can bring our whole selves to situations. And then the last part of it is about strategies. So what you were saying about, yeah, like if I want to pay attention, I can tell you the strategy for me to be able to pay attention. I just need your understanding to know that that's what I need in that moment. And it's going to enrich our lives. And I think the core of that book really is this thing that B.Rosenberg says, is that if you make a request of me, that is such a precious gift, because you have articulated something tangible that I can do to enrich the joy in both of our lives. And when I started to see things like that, it was incredible. So that book for me, like, I'm so grateful for it. It was this perfect book at a perfect time for me. What I really want is for everybody to be able to have the experience that I've had with these ideas. And so any opportunity that I get to recommend it, I absolutely will do so.
Thank you very much. It's really, yeah, I love the book as well. I love the ideas of nonviolent communication as much as how hard it is, because, like you say, the compassion for someone, really, I share that belief that people are in generally good, and still, yeah, sometimes you see an action and I'm so biased to think, why are you doing that way? And there's probably a few people that don't want to be generally good all the time. And I might have some ideas about who that might be, but that's irrelevant. I mean, they might be different people. What's interesting is indeed like having that, thinking about it and creating these environments, and understanding why people are saying something. And it links to a book that's here that I'm going to show. Where is the camera? So I'm reading at this moment, thanks for the feedback, which is it's one of the first books, or I think it's the first book. I've read a lot of books about giving feedback, but this is a book that's written for the people who are receiving feedback, and so it's completely the opposite. And what I've learned from it is that when you give feedback, people really want feedback for three kind of things. They want the appreciation, which we already talked a little bit about it. They want some people want coaching. How can I improve myself? And some people want evaluation. So am I doing a good job? Will you not fire me, or will you hire me, or something like that? And usually when we ask for feedback, the people expect either one of the three, and we might give them one of the three, but it might not be always the same. And when you talk about the compassion and you talk about misunderstandings, I might give you some coaching at the person, and that person might see it as an evaluation. Oh, you give me some feedback about how to do, I don't know, to make better spaghetti, or to make something else, and this is just an improvement. This is because I like this better, or whatever. And people might then think, oh, but you're now telling me that I'm a lousy cook and whatever. And then, okay, wait a minute, that's not. And what that nonviolent communication is helping me about is, okay, it's about untangling. And in that book, that says a lot of things about, okay, what was the intention? What were you looking for? What did I give you? And are we aligned on these kind of things? And I want to go back a little bit to what you said earlier about the British, and about, okay, let the emotions. I immediately thought about the Monty Python sketch about the war, about the fact that you're not able to talk about the war. And then, of course, the only thing that I forgot the name, but the John Cleese character could think about was the war, because that was not allowed. And it feels a lot about companies when they say you're not allowed to have emotions. Well, then the only thing that will happen is have emotions. Where I like, and this is where the nonviolent communication helps me as well, and other similar ideas. If I can express my emotions, if I can say, hey, now I'm really mad, I won't be acting out mad, or there's a lot less chance of acting out mad. If you tell me I'm not allowed to talk about my emotions, if I'm not allowed to say I'm mad or I'm sad or whatever, these emotions will come out and people will not understand, why am I reacting this kind of way? You're acting irrational, but maybe it's because I'm mad. It has nothing to do. I've had the situation where I had a situation at home. I was having an argument with my partner before coming to work, and I realized it when I came to work. So it was the first message I gave to my colleagues. I said, well, sorry if I'm irrational today. I just had an argument. I said stupid things to my partner, and it still is in my head. And that released it from me, and I didn't think about it the rest of the day. And my colleagues let me alone for an hour or something like, okay, let's get your coffee and whatever. And the only moment the first moment I thought back about that was when I came back to my car later on when I was driving home. And I realized that, the fact that I could just state to my colleagues, look, I did something stupid. I said something stupid to my partner, and it still is in my head. That made it so much more away. In a previous role at another company, that would not have been allowed, and I'm sure that it would have, I would not have been able to work.
I think thank you for sharing that, Eve. I think that's such a beautiful story. And I think that encapsulates a lot of the things that we talked about safety and trust and all of these things. I think as well, like something that is so powerful in that book is something that he talks about in terms of we're going to start taking responsibility, right? So language is the most important, the most powerful and important thing that we have. It's all that we really have in terms of our experience as humans. And we are given certain ideas through the language that we use. And the one that I am confronted with very often is this thing, you made me feel, or you make me feel, or I was made to feel. And when he says in the book, you can't make me feel anything, that for me was really difficult. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, clearly, if somebody says something insulting to me, then they make me feel hurt. Well, not really. I'm interpreting that thing through this own set of experiences that I have, and it's connecting to a feeling probably of a time in the past where I've experienced something similar. And so they don't make me feel anything, that there are all of these things going on in the world all of the time. And I can observe them, and I can interpret them, and I can experience feelings related to them. But ultimately, I am responsible for this thing that's going on, and it is legitimate. I feel things. I feel things so much, and I feel things all of the time. And denying that is deeply inhumane. And so when we're talking about technology, especially, we like to imagine, is this world of rationalism and logic. And it's not. It is this social construct. And what we need to be imbuing in it is this sense of humanity and care and kindness and compassion, the same way that we need to be imbuing that in the relationships that we have with one another.
Yeah, you make me think about something that I don't remember who said it. That doesn't matter. But what happens is that when you talk about technology, there is something really strange. Is that when we use a computer, a lot of users feel really dumb because the computer doesn't do what they do, and they think it's there. So somehow our industry made people think that when a computer is doing something stupid, that they're stupid. So we're a genius kind of industry that users feel dumb because of something that we didn't do, which is exactly the kind of thing you're talking about. No, we should create and we should understand as humans that I'm not dumb. There is something, and sometimes I am dumb. Of course, I do stupid things, but somehow this computer allows me to do dumb things, and somehow, okay, and that's the kind of thing. And I really like what you said about these interactions. Yes, I can make you feel dumb, and I can make you feel stupid or whatever, but it's really this is triggering. And it's also hard because sometimes I see it when I work with a colleague that I see something is stressing, And because I've coached them, I know that this is actually not about me or about the other coworker, but because I don't know, something happened in the past with their parents or with a teacher. I used to have a colleague that told me about an old boss. So every time somebody is asking something which is kind of logical, but is asked in a wrong way, that triggers a lot of things because of an abusive boss that was there with this person in the past. And like you say, that trigger is there, but we choose to react on some of these things, and some people can react to it and some people not. I might say the exact same thing to that ex-colleague and it won't happen, there won't be triggering, and my boss is, or the boss is asking the same thing in the same way, and it's triggering because it's a relational thing of a boss, and a colleague might do it, and then we don't understand it, and sometimes we see it, and of course saying it at that moment, oh, you feel triggered by the boss, would explode in a different way, so it's not helping. Just like I shouldn't tell my partner, oh, when you react to this is because your mother did it in the past. That's for sure is not helping. It's explaining, it's really like you just say, what nonviolent communication is helping us to see, realize, okay, wait a minute, what's happening, why are you, and again having that trusting relationship with a person. If I would be on a train station and I would see somebody reacting and just saying, oh, what's happening to you, that person will look at me and say, why you don't have that relationship, you don't have the mandate to ask me this question. And that's also understanding that in teams, when do we have the safety to ask these kind of questions and when we don't. That book from Marshall really was, Rosenberg was really helping a lot.
I think it's the thing as well about this temptation to try and fix things. I know that that's something that I've struggled with, and my partner is incredible, and she is so strong. And I know that in the past, like, I have had this arrogance to try and step in and diagnose or try and fix without her autonomy being considered. And again, like, it's actively unhelpful. And so we may have an idea, exactly like you say, like, oh, maybe you've had this experience with your boss in the past. If we stick to the realm of observations, all we get to say is like, hey, this is, at 2:43 p.m. you said this thing. I don't know what caused this thing. This was the impact that it had. Like, would we be able to do things differently in the future? It's such an incredibly respectful way that we can talk to one another. And I think even if other people aren't familiar with it as a concept, we are able to provide a really powerful thing, which is an example. And I think that having examples in my life of people who just very effortlessly are a certain thing have probably been this thing that have shaped me the most. I've been extraordinarily privileged to have encountered the people that I have in my life.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because that's indeed this is, for me, it kind of sums up a lot of the things that we've been talking about. Is indeed with that respect and with these kind of things. So let's move to that, for me, one of the most interesting questions. Is there a question that I didn't ask that you still want to answer, that you think like, oh, this is something that I really want to share, that this is an interesting question to ask you?
Actually, Eve, I think this is going to be the least interesting question, because I had a few ideas for what I would talk about here, but I was so delighted to get to explore all of those things in the talk so far. So I'm not at the moment feeling like there's anything in particular to explore. I mean, maybe for you, is there anything that we've talked about that you would like to spend any more time on?
Well, yeah, no, I think I've asked all the extra questions. Sometimes in conversations like this, I'm not asking extra questions for time limits. Sometimes because I know there's a time limit on the other side. I knew that we didn't have a time limit today, so I felt okay to ask all these extra questions, a little bit like what we talked about before. So I don't feel there's extra questions at this moment. But yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation. We went in all kinds of directions, in all kind of things. So yeah, is there anything else? Well, you talked a little bit about ThoughtWorks. This is a company every time and again I hear about, oh, but I used to work at ThoughtWorks, and I was like, wow, this, you also. So there's so many things. So maybe that you weren't there from the beginning. I think you just joined some time ago. Is there anything about that company that you want to share that you said, okay, this is what makes it so wonderful for working with these wonderful companies? You already talked about the diversity and inclusion. I think that's something, at least I know what this company is making great, because and especially at the level, I think you have, I don't know, more than 10,000 people working in this company, so it's a huge company and still is able to create that diversity, create these kind of agile mindset, that other kind of things. Is there anything else that makes you, that you want to talk about that?
That's a really interesting question, Eve. Thank you. And I think that it is absolutely the people, so I moved, I'd lived in England all of my life. I moved to Berlin. I started working for this company, and then everything was changing. And I was exposed to so many different ideas. And I think when we talk about diversity, it's often easy for us to talk about the practice rather than the principle. So the practice could be that we have, 50% underrepresented gender minorities in the workforce, and that's really important and it's powerful. What the powerful thing about diversity for me is that I have been so challenged, and I have been so challenged in such a safe way. I think it's that story about there's an old fish and he meets a young fish, and the old fish says, "How's the water?" and the young fish says, "What's water?" It's really that, until I think you are given this kind of mirror of somebody who has existed in a totally different context, it's very difficult to know like what is shared about our experience as people. And so for me, ThoughtWorks has just been the start of this incredible journey into finding out so much more about the world, about myself, about how we relate to one another. I think that as well in tech, we are in some way isolated from a lot of external ideas, and I think that we are existing in a time right now where it does feel like the emperor's clothes are starting to fall off. I know you talked about Elon Musk recently. This idea that the people who do have the power to make these big changes in tech somehow deserve it, I think is something which is harder and harder for us to maintain. And I think that there is definitely an opportunity right now. I really feel like this could be a very important inflection point where we start to look at ideas about how things can be produced differently. And I know that we've talked about humanity a lot, and that is such an important topic to me. I think if I was going to have answered the question of what question would I have asked, it would maybe be, what do I want to see in tech? And it absolutely is this thing about compassion and kindness and humanity and care, because I think that as a society right now, we are constructing a world of tech that does not contain those things. And I think that technology then is shaping a society that doesn't contain those things. And so that really is where I feel very passionate right now. And that's something where I feel like it's quite a nascent idea for me, but I really would like to explore it further.
Yeah, it makes me think about all kind of ways how technology has been impacting life. The most known thing about it is the book Invisible Women. So the fact that we're designing a world and not thinking about women for car safety and all kind of things. But there's I've read a book about the systems or weapons of math destruction. So math, the mathematics, and indeed a lot of what we're doing with AI, and if we don't care about it, and the fact that we create faucets that are recognizing hands, but they're only recognizing white hands and not black hands, is like, wait, that this is not normal. So that's definitely a problem. So there is all kind of technology, and technology, like you said, and like we talked already before, it's like it has such an impact on our lives. There is nothing anymore that exists where there's almost nothing. I really need to think about, do I have a device in my house that is using electricity that is not having a chip in it? I don't think so. I need to look at it, but I think even the refrigerator, there is no screen on it, whatever, but I'm pretty sure it has some kind of chip to do whatever. Yeah. And luckily for me, or I care that one is not connected to the internet because it might give other problems. But these days, all these kind of devices much more are connected to the internet. And it has some advantages. I'm not going to say this. I'm not a skeptical at that level. I really believe I have lots of devices connected to the internet. But at the same time, we need to think, what does it happen? Yesterday, I saw some people, and I'm still not sure if the 1st of April, if it was a joke or not, but I saw some people about sending messages about cars acting very strange. And so basically, so having a car sitting on a driveway and seeing on the mileage that the car thinks it's driving 60 miles an hour or 60 kilometers an hour while it's sitting on the driveway. Yeah, that's dangerous. And you need, okay, how does a car react when it needs to reboot on the highway? Because it's a computer these days. It's computers on wheels, so cars need to be able to, or that computer needs to be able to reboot. And what's the reaction there, and things like that. So this is just the thing that, yeah, we never thought about it. The fact that there is a missile rocket in space that's been going on for 20 years past Mars and whatever. There is a computer in there. That computer is 20 years old. It's rebooted already dozens of hundreds, probably thousands of times. And so people thought about that, and we are having, thinking about all kind of other things. So computers,
right. It's safety as well, right? And as well, like if we're thinking, should I write the implementation first or the test first, then part of that is definitely safety. But we're also thinking about how we're constructing society and how we can embed safety into that. And I think a huge part of it is about boundaries and responsibility and ownership. And I think that we have come into this space where we don't feel like we do have boundaries over, especially data. And you're talking about, like I bought this washing machine the other day, and it has to connect to my Wi-Fi, and I have to do it over the app on my phone, and it's so frustrating. Like, there's no benefit to this except for the benefit that now Hoover know about my washing cycle, and then presumably can do something valuable with this data. But these boundaries that we would like to have are constantly being permeated by these technology firms. And who are they accountable to? What is the visibility of it? Like how do we ensure that what is going on is something that we want to happen? And I think as well, we do live in an equitable society right now. The technology produced by that inequitable society is deepening those and entrenching those inequities. How do we change that? Like, there is huge promise in tech as well, and I really liked what you said. Like, I'm not a skeptic. I think that there is absolutely huge power there, but I also think that it's unexplored. So I think, when we think about these topics, there clearly is a bright future for us as technologists, as people, and there clearly needs to be some kind of combination of these things. And then what does that look like? And what does it feel like to live there? And then also, how do we take that and tell that story to people so that they also, wish to live in this preferable future that we can construct?
Yeah, I really like, and the data, like you said, the washing machine, it feels kind of strange, but there's all kind of data that's really interesting to know at the global level. If you're talking about apps that do, I don't know, period tracking or anything, it creates data that's interesting to know as a society. Okay, what does that really mean? Because now a lot of these things are based on things that people tell their doctors, but we don't always know. If we have some kind of trackers that can do it much more accurate, that's better. But who has access to this? And if you see what's happening in the States, where people, it's illegal to get abortions and whatever at levels that are like, wait a minute, if I travel to the United States with my family, what is that impact, and things like that. So that's the global impact on all of these things. So that's, like you say, we really need to think as IT people, like, okay, when we create this, where do we put that data, and who has access, and know that it will be hacked at some point. So maybe we don't want to track everything. If you have your washing machine, I just know that at some point, some hackers will be able to hack washing machines. So what does that mean? Is my washing machine then vulnerable? Can I disconnect it from the internet and only connect it when I want? So that's the kind of thing, and so it's good that we can have some I don't know, tracking, and it will help. If my car crashes and it detects it and automatically dials the police to say, okay, there is a car crash, it could save my life, so that's good. But does it need to be online all the time and send data to the police? Well, maybe if I'm driving all the time 200 kilometers an hour, that's probably is a bad thing, what we don't want to do. But at the same time, where's the autonomy and where's all kind of things? So
I think it's really true, and it's diversity as well, right? Because although for us, probably if the police are there, then they may help us. For a lot of people, that isn't the case, right? And so
exactly,
having the perspective when we're building these things of people who could be negatively impacted, it's so important and it's so vital. And so coming back to your question, yeah, I think that is something which is wonderful about ThoughtWorks, is that there is a diversity of perspective and experiences, and I haven't seen that in any other organization that I have worked for or with.
well, especially not at that size, I would say. I've seen it in similar kind of companies, but this is a very large global company. And yeah, when we talked about Twitter, we talked about Tesla, these have similar kind of sizes. Maybe TalkSource is even bigger than these companies, but it's the leadership style, the way people are treated is so differently, and it has grown, and of course it's grown very big. But at the same time, I think this is existing at least for about 20 years. So maybe it's grown slower than some of the other tech companies that are doubling in size every year. I don't know how fast it has grown, but it really, for me, that diversity is visible from the outside, and the way people talk about it, and not everybody's staying, but that's also for multiple reasons. People learn and grow and outgrow a company, or want to move much more independent. So that, for me, that doesn't tell anything about the company as such, but it just shows that, yeah, even the people that I know have been there years ago, it's just a kind of quality mark, and it's just to find, okay, there is some generally appreciation for the world, I would say. Let's put it like that. So that's definitely something.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to move to that next question about who do you think I should ask next? Is there what's the person that you want to invite?
So I had the privilege of working with somebody, the last job that I had before I moved to Berlin, which was Mike Hogan, and he is a developer. And
is this correct?
This is him. Yeah, it's so good to see him. He has been a developer for a long time. He was also an ex-Thought worker. He was the person who gave me the idea that maybe I would also enjoy working at ThoughtWorks. Mike is somebody who has given me so much. We talked about this a little earlier, that I think that one of the most powerful things that we can be in is an example. I think that Mike, for me, was this example of a leader who was humble and who really embodied this idea of servant leadership. He has, I mean, he's also an incredibly smart person, and I think that level of intellect combined with the humility is such a rare combination. And he just showed me that we can have work which is frustrating and difficult, but that we can still be patient and understanding and kind with one another. And I suspect that if he hears this, he will think that, that's not something that I was deliberately trying to do in that situation. But again, we do these things all the time, right? That give people an example of how to be different. And he, for me, is the prime example of that. And when I was working with him, he gave me all of these ideas about agile and extreme programming, without ever being like, oh, the Agile Manifesto says this. It was so much more about practice and experience. I really adored working with him. He's given me so much, and I would love to hear what he has to say in this similar situation. So it was a purely selfish recommendation, because I would love to explore his brain a little more.
Well, but I really like that. Okay, you do it for selfish reasons, whatever, but at the same time, you talk about a person with so much love that you learn so much about it. And for me, this is one of the reasons why I ask people to introduce other people and to talk about, okay, who should I talk next? Because typically when we think about Agile, we think about first the 17 people that created the Agile Manifesto, then a few others, big names. But agile is so much more for me. Agile is really the people doing the work. And of course, I'm interested in the people with more experience, like Linda Rising. It's at 80 years old. She has so much experience, and that brings so much knowledge. At the same time, I'm interested in, okay, who are the people on the field doing the work, who might be lesser known, who might not have written a book, or might just doing the work. A little bit like you say, we're just doing it and sharing it. But and that's for me what brings as much value, and that's what I try to explore with these videos, is having multiple kind of facets, because agile is so much more than just the big names. It's and for me, this is why I really enjoyed this conversation. It's really been wonderful to explore, and a little bit, and yeah, going in all kind of directions. But in the end, if I look back, and I'm pretty sure when I would listen back, I will see links even more between all the different kind of topics. So I really enjoyed our Sunday morning together.
Wow, Eve, thank you so much. Thank you first of all for the invitation. When I realized that Matteo had recommended me, then I was so touched that he thought of me, and I have been looking forward to getting the opportunity to talk to you for a couple of weeks now. We had to cancel our previous appointment because I was sick. But fortunately, I'm feeling better right now. I have adored exploring all of these things with you. I've really appreciated so much your perspective. You clearly, like, you have all of these things that you can bring. It's very satisfying for me, I think, where I can, go in these different directions and then hear like another little bit of that direction. And so I have had just an absolutely wonderful time this morning getting to speak to you. And I've also really enjoyed going through the interviews that you've had with other people, and they have been giving me so much as well. So I just wanted to say how incredibly grateful that I am that you are doing this, and I got the opportunity to talk to you today. So thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome, because yeah, for me, like I said earlier, I love doing these conversations, and sometimes it's really like, okay, I now take 2 hours to talk to you, but I know that I will take another probably 4 to 6 hours editing, even if I remember avoid too much editing. But still, I need to listen to the full interview to prepare some of these things. It takes a long time, but it's people like you that send the appreciation, that tell me like, okay, but it really helps, and listen, and we learn a lot. That's what I was hoping when I created this. And this is what, it's reactions like you that keep me going forward. I have a long list. I have 300 people on my, or actually 370 people on my list. Okay, 70 I already talked to, so about 300 more. I already guarantee everyone I'm not going to talk to everyone on my list. I just know. I don't know how many years I will keep going. But I also know that every time I ask someone, I at least get one name. Sometimes I get 2, 3 names. I spoke to someone earlier this week that gave me 6 names, I think. So that kind of makes that list a lot bigger. So as long as I know now, it gives me energy. I keep going, but I also know, yeah, there will be a point that I will stop. But I hope at least that these interviews will stay on, and people will keep learning about people long after I've stopped recording these things, because I think, like what you said, you show so much more about, okay, if it's either nonviolent communication or what you learned about yourself, HDAD, the multiple aspects of, okay, the fact that I didn't went into that question, but I think there's so much that we as an agile community need to learn about team leads, because for a while we said in agile, it's no, we don't want team leads anymore. We want product owners, we want scrum masters. But gradually the last 4 or 5 years, I see a lot of people saying, well, wait a minute, there is some value in team leads, but what is their role? We need to think about that. What's the kind of thing? So I'm really glad to also hear that ThoughtWorks is creating a program around that, and thinking hard about it. And I think, yeah, there's so much value in a lot of these things and these conversations. So
I'm excited to talk about those things when I see you in person.
So we'll definitely make sure. Well, one of the things that I do this conversation to avoid to go too much to conferences these days. For personal reasons, I try to stay as much as home. Or, well, I say at home, but I mean Benelux. I do go to some conferences rather local. I try to avoid to go to other things. But this is my way to connect to the outer agile community and find people a little bit around the world, even though Amsterdam today is not that far. But still, if I would have driven to Amsterdam, it would have taken me more time than just this interview. So I'm already grateful that we can do it remotely. So thank you very much for your time. And I wish you a wonderful Sunday. Well, it's almost afternoon, so a wonderful rest of your Sunday.
Thank you so much, Yves. You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.